just before we get into this week's podcast, I just need to say we had a few sound issues with the internet, so apologies beforehand, but hopefully the information that you would like to gain from this episode is still intact. But if you have any questions or didn't quite make out what we were saying, please drop us a line, and hope you enjoy this one. Welcome everyone to another episode of the Talk Time with Teresa Saunders, my colleague, and Meredith McCarthy. I have been practicing as a clinical hypnotherapist for many, many years, and I really enjoy drilling down into certain topics. So hopefully this one will be interesting for you guys out there. So welcome, Teresa.
Thank you, Meredith. Welcome as well. Enjoying being here at the Talk Time. A week goes around quickly.
It does. So we're going to be talking about ideomotor signals. So what are they? What are they? Well, when you go into hypnosis, sometimes a hypnotherapist will ask you to signal using your fingers, yes or no, or I don't know. So this is quite a helpful technique, because sometimes even nodding the head sort of needs a whole lot more muscle control, a lot of more muscles to be engaged than raising a little finger. And the finger can be just such a little wee thing. So it could be any finger that might signal yes or no. And it's not about setting the client up to say your index finger will. So it's important that when we set up a client, we just say, and your finger can indicate yes, and you'll find a finger will indicate, and that will be the yes finger. And the finger, that will indicate no will be the no finger, and it will usually is the different finger. It's usually not the same one. So it's quite amazing. And also to add into that the idea of I don't know, because there might be something that that client just doesn't know, and that's fair enough. Sometimes they don't know. So it's nice to have that as an option. What are the positives, do you think, of setting up a session and utilizing the ideomotor signals?
So the use of it can help with communication. So if your client is actually quite nervous, and that you can use your ideomotor responses for that instead of communicating, because the subconscious actually knows what the answer to those questions. And you can actually sort of dig deeper of your hidden emotions through memories, providing insights, and that for access through that might not be so easily accessed through verbal communication.
So when we're looking at it, a lot of hypnotherapists out there shy away from using it. Why do you think they do that?
Maybe when training they haven't understood it fully, of the actual response and how magical it can actually be, because it can be any part of the body that actually gives that response the client does. I mean, for one thing, I have done, and you have to pick your clients as well with this, but getting them to stand up and finding the sense of gravity. I mean, kids, this is a good one, gets them out of the chair, and you ask them to find no, and their body will sway forward or backward or to the side, and then you do the same thing for yes, and is exactly the same principles as using your fingers or a leg or whatever. But I think sometimes it's they haven't had enough time when they've actually been learning, so they don't fully understand ideomotor responses. And maybe a fear of what the client will think if they start getting them to use body parts to move.
What I've found, it's a really efficient way of communicating with a client when they're deeply relaxed, and they may not have the ability to articulate through their voice anymore. So you can absolutely shift it to using ideomotor signals, which helps you to continue to communicate well with that client, even when they're deeply hypnotized. And that is a good technique. I had one yesterday. This particular client came in with a fear of mice and rats. and she described it as being terrifying. And when we were doing the
I can
hypnosis,
relate to that one.
yeah, when we were doing the hypnosis, there was a point where she stopped nodding her head, and I'm like, okay, she's just relaxed a lot more, and you could see her. Because when we're looking at someone, you're reading the body. You know, you want to sort of look at their rate of breath and their body language, and you can kind of notice them slipping deeper and deeper into hypnosis, and their ability sometimes to move or engage, or they might even hallucinated that they actually did nod, but they didn't. So that can happen too. I just moved into, so, you know, instead of your nodding, just when you're ready, when you've done that, just indicate with one of your fingers, and up went her finger. So it was that quick. And it wasn't labor intensive to set it up. And I think a lot of times we have to think, oh, what's the script? How do I set that client up successfully to use their fingers? Well, often it's an organic moment that you think, yeah, you're just going to use it. And it's as simple as saying, and it's amazing your body can actually speak and indicate how it feels about things. And is it okay to do that? And you can indicate that with your finger if it's okay, and up goes the finger. So there are many ways that you can sort of introduce the concept to the client while they're hypnotized. How would you go about setting up your ideomotor signal with a client?
So yeah, so if it was a child, I would get them to stand up, and I would ask them if they could, like, just get them to wobble around for the moment, and then find that point of gravity, center point, and then when they've come back to the stillness, ask them to just allow their body to indicate a yes. And then I'd look at where their body moves to, and then bring them back again to the center, and then ask them to show no. And often that is a different place. So one could be forward, one could be back, or it could be sideways, whichever it indicates. And then you've got to remember to recalibrate that as well afterwards. And I think sometimes that might be something that people forget to do, is to calibrate
Yeah.
the system. So you
Do you
want to
want to
test
give
them.
an example of how you recalibrate someone so that people can understand what you mean?
So you want to calibrate them. So you just want them to you've got your yes and you've got your no signals that you've established, and then you you'd maybe just then use like a finger. You'd forewarn your client that you're actually going to use the hand, and then you'd and you touch it when they say yes. Could you indicate yes? And you touch at that point of yes. And could you indicate no? And you'd do the same for that signal. Then I would move on and do a simple question like, is your name Joe Bloggs? And watch for their body to actually move, hopefully in the yes, so that I know that the calibration has worked.
Nice. So, you know, when we're looking at qualifying a proper yes and a proper no and a proper maybe, yeah, it's nice to do that. The disadvantage often with using yes and no questions can be quite loaded, because quite often when we're thinking about why we might ask something that's a yes and no answer, we need to avoid leading the client too much. So quite often it can be, is there like a more global, is there a part of you that's ready to let go of something today? And just signal. And so the yes finger will go up, let's say. And is it okay for your subconscious to talk to your conscious mind about that and come to an agreement about how that's going to be? And the yes signal goes up. And you say, okay, so in a moment, I'm going to invite you to do exactly that. And when you've done that, just let me know by signaling the yes signal. And you just leave them and they do stuff in between. So we're not really using yes and no in that kind of questioning way that you would normally say, do you like fluffy toys?
But you'd be using direct suggestion, wouldn't you? Be being very direct with your client to reframe the situation
Mm.
as such, yes?
Yeah, so when we're kind of looking at an open-ended question versus a closed question, we need to be a bit mindful about the kind of closed questions we do use in that scenario, that we're not accidentally in our model of the client's world rather than in their model of their world and what they need.
Mm.
Mm. When we're looking at the idea of telling a client what we're going to do before we even start the hypnosis, I don't do that. I don't do that method in the way of we're going to use these signals and all of that stuff. I just journey them into that hypnotic journey, and then we set up stuff. I think it's a much easier approach. But I do recognize that some people do like that in their pre-talk to let the client know what's going to happen next. What are your thoughts on that, Teresa?
I really gauge it by the client that I've actually got coming in as to whether there's somebody that likes to know exactly what's going to be happening in their session, or whether there's somebody that's quite happy to just free flow through that session and move in. Again, not preempting what is best for my client.
Mm. I find over explaining sometimes with a client that's nervous can be counterproductive, because then they're looking to meet that expectation. But if that's not organically where the session needs to go, sometimes as hypnotherapists, we need to be agile and let it go if it's not working. So if we set the client up with too many expectations of what we're about to do, and let's say one of those techniques doesn't work for that client, it can actually interrupt the successful nature of that session. So it's often better, I find, to be a bit mysterious, so the client hasn't got any preconceptions of what it should or shouldn't be, or whether they're meeting that target or not.
Totally agree with that. Yeah,
So
definitely
I
important.
think we need to be aware that anything can happen in a session. And if someone goes into, let's say, a regression, a spontaneous regression back to some time where things began, the ideomotor signals may not be enough either for you to check in with the client fully. So it's okay to ask the client in a moment, even after you've been establishing the ideomotor signals, to ask the client to be able to explain what they're noticing or what they're experiencing, or what they're remembering. Because from time to time, I think as therapists, we need to be comfortable to check in with the client and help the client to articulate it out loud. Now, if they're still having problems even at that point, and you don't get that verbal articulation response, then you continue using the ideomotor signals. But from time to time, there may be a need to get the client to explain or express what's going on for them. And then you might actually return after that to the ideomotor signals again. So we can kind of use it intermittently. We don't actually have to just use it all the way through, which I think probably people may assume that that's what we do. But we need to be ready to work with the client in all sorts of different ways when they're doing that journey, because you never know what's going to happen until it happens.
That's right. And I think that's the beauty of hypnosis. No two sessions are the same. It can completely change, and from what you thought at the beginning might not continue to come out the outcome that you thought would do, or the way you're going to journey through to get to that outcome.
Yeah. So when we're kind of looking at the idea of the non-verbal communication with someone who's anxious, a lot of people are a bit scared of telling their story out loud because it might be rather gruesome. They could have gone through a bit of trauma where they don't want to go and say it out loud into the room, and it feels safer just to do a private process. And I think many people who do, what's that technique? The Simpson protocol. They often talk about that in the way of regressing someone, but not having them relive it in the same way, and also working with the highest self, the all-knowing self, or the superconscious. So that's where the ideomotor signals will be useful in that space, because you're working now in a different way, perhaps. But even without what we call the Simpson protocol, other things, nothing's new in hypnosis, really. So you don't have to go on this long sort of course and this, that, and the other. The stock standard basic hypnotherapy toolkit is going to equip you to do regression, to do future pacing, to do work with client, whether it's trauma work or ego strengthening or fear phobia, letting that go. We have incredible techniques, and it's just trusting in them and playing with them and getting more and more familiar with them. Yeah, what's your thought on that, Teresa?
I think that's a really good way of explaining it, Meredith. I think sometimes it's not the client that needs convincing, it's actually the therapist that needs convincing, and having faith in the toolkit that they actually have, and that the therapist will go, the client will actually take from what they actually need to, and it's trusting in those skills that you have learned through doing your diploma and your study. Yeah. I mean, Ideomotor is great for so many different things, like you say, with the trauma, but it's also good for decision making and behavior changes, because it identifying subconscious blocks to desired behaviors, like such as smoking cessation or weight loss. So ideomotor responses allow you to target interventions that address underlying motivations and resistance, which somebody might not do verbally to you.
Yeah. What I like is a bit of a dance between the yes set, so the Ericksonian compliance yes set, where you're getting a person to go, and it's nice to relax, isn't it? And so you're adding a question to a situation of an experience the client is having. And isn't it interesting how easily we can resolve things when it's time? Nod your head if that's true. That's right. And so we're actually starting to do the ideomotor signal right there when you're using the yes set, which is really, really nice to reinforce positive change and take a person deeper into their self-belief of change. So we can play around with hypnotic language. We can use, these little wee movements of the body to indicate shift and change that helps a person deepen their resourcefulness and their ability to do that change.
Yeah, we use a lot of the tools that we put different names to in hypnosis in everyday life anyway, without people realizing that it is actually a tool for hypnosis. Yeah.
Are you familiar with the yes set? Have you used that much in your client sessions?
I have used it now and again. I do use it. It's not a major go-to for me. But yes, I do use it. Not with all my clients. I do pick the clients that I actually use that with. As I say, I do use a lot of video motor skills more with children than with the adults.
Yeah.
But maybe I need to take a lesson from my own words there and have more faith in myself and doing it for the adults. I also sort of think Bob Burns, I'm not going to demonstrate it now, but the Swan protocol as well for the ideomotor.
Yeah.
Remember Bob Burns and the Swan? That's another form of ideomotor response. And I do sort of invite people to go and have a look up Bob Burns, and he'll do a far better demonstration than I will do on the Swan technique.
And it was an accident how we came across it too, which was rather lovely. And I think we do have some pleasant accidents when we're working with our clients, and we come up with our own protocol on how to deal with something, and we can rinse and repeat that as we get more and more confident in doing those things. So you can understand the principles of something, and you can utilize them in fresh and new ways, which is kind of cool. So definitely, look up Bob Burns. I might even actually put a little wee link into the YouTube video, so you can go and find that swan technique and get to understand what we're talking about here.
Going back to the yes set,
Carry on, sorry.
Meredith, what would you use that more for in your practice? Going
Um,
back to the yes set, what would you use it for in your clinic?
Self-belief in change. So all the time, if I have a smoker or someone who wants to quit drinking or drugs or anything like that, is a definite go-to, because I want full buy-in. I want them to become awesome and compliant and yes, yes, yes. So if we have a compounding of someone agreeing, then we can put in the ultimate challenge, and they will agree to it. So they get into this rhythm of compliance, which goes beyond, under the radar, the critical radar.
Yeah,
So it's
behavior
amazing.
changes, it's great for.
Yeah, so it's amazing how quickly that can really boost the confidence in a client. When they go out of the session, they're buzzing because they've just done yes a whole lot of times, and even agreeing to something and really being 100% with it. It's incredibly important, actually, at the end of those kind of sessions, for your client to be on cloud nine, believe anything can
And
happen.
decision making is also another one there.
Carry on, Teresa, sorry.
So, and decision making, you know, when your clients are facing complex decisions, you know, using your yes set for that can be a really good one again, because you're bypassing your verbal language and you're going directly to the subconscious for that answer.
Absolutely. And after a while, when you set up and nod your head if that is true, you can actually stop saying nod your head when that's true, because they'll just start to nod their head. So this is their sort of unconscious or subconscious mind agreeing, yes, yes, yes. And they've forgotten that even they're doing it consciously. It just happens. Just as we are in a conversation, we agree with someone, we nod our head.
And the response is that, you know, they're so non-intrusive as well. It's a gentle way to explore the subconscious material. Yeah,
absolutely. There are some good reasons to use idiomotor signals, and I guess overcoming resistance is definitely a big one. So when we're kind of looking at that idea of a resistant client, we can bypass that critic and we can sort of take them deeper. And if you want to, use a depth argument, some people are on board with that and some people not so much. But there's definitely a superpower in it if you can engage the subconscious in a really coordinated and helpful way. Checking also, are there any other parts that don't want to change? And that is where the signal will come in loud and strong. And that's where you might want to deal with that part that doesn't want to change. So it's not all smooth sailing. Sometimes it's problem finding. It's like, is there a resistant part of that client? And the idiomotor signal is a really good way of finding out whether there is something at a core level that that client needs to resolve before change can occur.
And when you're using it on those when you're using the ideomotor response, like we've spoken before, it accesses deep-seated issues and can accelerate the therapeutic process compared to traditional talk therapy methods. I mean, that's my opinion. Obviously, other people may not agree with that, but I think it's really an efficient way of actually working with some deep-seated traumas and behaviors.
Absolutely. Now, you can use it too throughout the whole process of doing timeline or future pacing or any kind of regression work, or even in the now. Like, you can work in that way. So it's very versatile, and it's just a very quick way, an easy way to get the subconscious to communicate with you as a therapist. Because otherwise, you're guessing a lot of it, and even if they can't find their words, their body can sometimes talk more to the truth than their words can, because people get stuck in their story of belief. So often if you ask the physical body to express it, it knows. It knows what you've been doing.
And clients, we're human beings. We can be embarrassed, and it can be really hard sometimes for us to actually talk to somebody and tell them our true reason for that behavior or how that made us felt. Whereas, like you say, the subconscious doesn't worry, it just lets us know.
Absolutely. When we're kind of looking at that, I guess, insight to psychosomatic issues, let's look at this one for a moment. So some people may have a physical manifestation of an illness or like maybe migraines, or they've got back issues or some other pain disorder. That can be really useful to kind of get to the core of it and use the ideomotor signals to do that. So the psychosomatic issues that happen in the body. What are your thoughts about that and using
That's
ideomotor?
where, it's one of the ways I would use the yes set. It's one of the ways that I would actually use the yes set to then access part and to start going on to the parts, because sometimes there's a secondary gain for people. And by using the parts, you can then move forward and find out more, delve deeper into why somebody is doing that sort of behavior. What are they gaining? Is there a secondary gain out of that?
Yeah. So we're using a couple of words like secondary gain and parts and stuff. So in our series, I would love to talk on those different topics. Again, if anyone has any questions for us to talk on, maybe something that you want us to delve deeper into, flick us a line. We'd love to answer your questions. But when we're looking in a therapeutic way of why someone is continuing a behavior that kind of at first glance looks very destructive, there might be secondary gain. And without going too much into that, it's something that a therapist needs to be on the lookout for. Otherwise, if you don't address that secondary gain, you don't get change. So they're looking at that part of them that doesn't want to change, that part believes somehow that behavior that they're trapped in is of benefit.
It could well be a trauma from the past that at one point in time it actually was protecting you, but it doesn't need to continue that behavior anymore.
That's right. So let's say a little child's really sick, and it was the first time their parents, stayed home. They were really worried about the child, and they got ice blocks and cuddles and good stories. And suddenly the child gets more and more sick all the time. And there's not really much wrong potentially, but the child has a secondary gain. They're feeling loved every time they get sick. So their body goes, oh, maybe if I get sick more often, I'll get more love. So that can be a cycle. That it really can be a cycle that people pick and run with. Because of external validation is sometimes people are really hungry for that because they're not feeling valued. They're feeling invisible.
That doesn't actually necessarily stop when they're a child. It can continue. They can keep that behavior, that part of them can keep that right the way through their adulthood if you don't address that secondary gain.
So that psychosomatic stuff, this is, how has the body manifested that thing, and using idiomotor signals to work through that is really powerful. And I've seen such a huge change in so many people. I had one guy, and he had almost like an oos. So every time he went to pick up stuff, it was like he had he had weakness and muscle pain and joint pain and so on. But every time he went to the doctor, there was nothing wrong. Now, he was in a point where he was petrified of going to university. He had no idea what he wanted to do. And of course, the more sick he became, the more he avoided that ultimate decision. Now, when we got into the session, we used the ideomotor signals. That was able to be resolved. And actually, in that very session, the pain left them, like literally. And he was able to make the decisions because we worked on that deeper level of causation, like what's the secondary gain here, what's really going on. So incredible sessions can happen, really great outcomes quite quickly when you're dealing with the subconscious and you actually help that subconscious work it through.
For sure.
Yeah. So look, if anyone wants to come along and find out more, exciting news. The school, well, we've gone online and we're going to be doing live classes. So anyone, no matter where you live, can now join in. And this is exciting because it's about being accessible and helping people be the best therapist. And if we can deliver this program in a really great way that can help you become who you want to be and get out there, then this is just another step that we're doing to make things accessible. So check it out. The next round is at the end of July. So we're starting July 2024. I've got dates right up to 2028. So if it's not right for you this year, check out next year's. But it's broken down into modules. We're going to be focusing a lot on explaining techniques, demonstrating techniques, and then you go and break out and do those techniques in the different breakout rooms. And I can hop in there and give you personalized support and really offer you through that process. Anything you would like to add to that, Teresa?
I'd just like to say, so please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Drop us a link. Go and have a look out on the website. And thank you so much, Meredith, to inviting me for another talk time. And I look forward to our next week of it.
It's been a pleasure. So goodbye, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.